Welcome to Spectrum Lab Essentials, your source for equipment, instrument, and consumables.
You know, we're obsessed with measuring pretty much everything, right? We measure distance, weight, temperature. But what about something as everywhere and as, fleeting as light itself? How do you even begin to measure that? Well, let's dive in.
Okay, so we're going to start with this little gadget, the WORKZONE LX-101. Now, the manual makes this pretty bold claim. It says, this thing sees the world almost exactly like you and I do, which, for a little electronic box, is quite a statement.
I mean, clearly it's not looking for shapes or recognizing faces. It's not identifying objects. So what exactly is it looking for? What is it trying to see out there in the world?
Well, here's our answer. This is a digital lux meter. Its entire job, its whole purpose in life, is just to measure the intensity of light. Sounds simple, right? But the way it does it, that's where things get really interesting.
So let's break this down. What does it actually mean to measure light? Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how the meter works, we really need to get a handle on the what. What is the core idea this whole device is built around?
The official science-y term for what this meter measures is illuminance. And that's just a fancy way of saying how much light is actually splashing onto a surface, whether it's your desk, the page of a book, or the floor of a warehouse.
And the unit we use for that is the lux. So to put it into perspective, 1 lux is basically the amount of light you'd get from 1 lumen spread out over a 1 square meter area. A really simple way to picture it is imagine a single candle about 1 meter away from a wall. The amount of light hitting a 1 meter square on that wall is roughly 1 lux. Okay, so now we know what it's looking for. Illuminance, measured in lux. So how does it actually do it? This is the part that really earns it that nickname, the electronic eye. On the surface, the process is super simple. First, light hits that little white dome. That's the photodetector. Then, a sensor inside takes that light energy and turns it into a tiny electrical signal. And finally, the gadget's brain crunches the numbers and displays it on the screen for you as a reading in lux. Easy.
But hold on, here's the twist. This is the really crucial part. The meter isn't just measuring raw energy. It's specifically calibrated to measure brightness the way a human eye perceives it. And that's a huge deal, because our eyes are way more sensitive to some colors of light than others.
And this graph from the manual, this is the secret sauce. This curve shows you the sensor's sensitivity to different colors. See how it peaks right there in the green and yellow part of the spectrum? That is 100% on purpose. It's engineered to perfectly match the sensitivity of the human eye, which also sees green and yellow light as being the brightest. This is why it can tell you how bright a room feels to a person, not just how much raw energy is flying around. Okay, so it's a really clever piece of tech that mimics our own eyes. But so what? Why does any of this matter? Why do we actually need to go around measuring how bright things feel? Well, this simple measurement has some seriously powerful uses.
And it turns out it's incredibly useful. For workplace safety, you can make sure there's enough light to prevent eye strain and accidents. For photographers, it's the secret to nailing that perfect exposure. If you're growing plants indoors, it's how you give them the perfect amount of light to thrive. You can even use it to check if a security camera has enough light to see clearly, or to just make sure those new light bulbs you bought are actually as bright as the box says they are.
Now, let's zoom back in on our specific device, the LX-101, and see how all these ideas are baked right into its design.
So if you look at the meter, you'll see this big rotary dial right in the middle. That's not just your on-off switch. It actually lets you pick the measurement range. Are you measuring the subtle light in a cozy living room or the full blast of direct sunlight? That dial tunes the sensor to be more or less sensitive, so you get a useful reading. And this little table shows you exactly what that dial is doing under the hood. At low light levels, say under 2000 lux, it's super precise. It measures down to a single lux. But as the light gets way brighter, you don't need that level of detail, so the resolution changes. It's just a really smart design that keeps it accurate across the board, while giving you the most precision right where you need it most. And beyond that, the manual points out a few other cool things. It uses what's called an LSI circuit, which basically just means its guts are really compact and durable. That separate sensor on the curly cord, that's super clever. It lets you place the sensor right where you need to measure, without you or the meter itself casting a shadow on it. Plus, it just runs on a standard 9-volt battery, and it's small and light enough to toss in a bag.
So when you put it all together, what looks like a pretty simple box is actually this incredibly sophisticated tool. It lets us take something totally subjective, like how bright a room feels, and turn it into a solid objective number. And once you have that number, you can control, you can optimize, and you can perfect one of the most important parts of our environment.